I'm here with Sam Miltich, who is a jazz guitarist born and raised in the North Woods of Minnesota. He's played with Paul Melling's Hot Club of San Francisco and toured internationally with the Robin Nolan Trio. His own band, the Clearwater Hot Club, is a mainstay of the Twin Cities jazz community. Sam, so great to see you, and thanks for sitting down to chat.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm grateful that you asked.
What's your routine look like at the moment as of last couple weeks, last month or so?
Yeah,
just in terms of your music making and the pandemic and all of that.
Yep, that's actually a really good question to be asking, because I've had to be I haven't been as intentional about my daily, weekly routine as I have been during the pandemic, because I've really had this feeling of use it or lose it, just because there's not much performing going on. And I've been asked to do a few things and I wasn't comfortable doing it. And I've just kind of said, until something gets resolved and something's safer, I'm just going to do stuff from home. But I've had to be intentional about it. And actually what I do is I break up the day, and I typically play about an hour and a half. And I do it 3 different sessions. And, I wake up and I have my coffee and do my morning routine. And then basically, as soon as that's done, I pick up the guitar. And I wind up doing, just my basic maintenance, scales and arpeggios stuff. So I've been doing that in the morning, and then I'll typically do like a late afternoon, when I would sort of take a break in the day, I'll do another little session, work on tunes a little more intentionally, but actual songs versus just technique kind of stuff. And then in the evening, every evening I sit down on my porch and I play outside, and any of my neighbors that can hear it, they get a little concert for the night, and I just sit out there and just play for my own personal enjoyment. But it was like the days started to all bleed together after a while, especially like in the spring after the first 2 months or so, because like the weekly routine of Wednesday night jazz night or whatever that we would be playing was gone. Like that isn't happening, and my regular monthly gigs over in Bemidji or Duluth or Grand Rapids up here, those are all gone. And you had those sort of touchstones in your life of those gigs, and everything had just dried up. And it was like, man, there's a kind of, what do you call it? Like I say my hands are hot. Like when you're gigging, your technique is hot. And you get to a point when, like, if you're working a lot, I don't practice that much when I'm working a lot, because I don't have enough time in the day to practice. It's most of my day is consumed by, preparing and getting ready for the gig, and wind up just doing a lot of gigging. So like one of the things I found is over the course of a year, if you look at a year, once spring and summer rolls around, I'm not practicing that much. But when winter happens, our gigs, at least for me where I live, my gigs slow down, especially after the holidays. And that's a more introspective time for kind of making decisions artistically, which direction you want to go, how you want to start playing. So, that sort of introspective time period that would be coming in the winter sort of started to happen during COVID, because there wasn't gigs, right? And I've been somewhat intentional about what I'm doing in terms of I'm trying to branch out. I've taken a couple online lessons. I took a lesson with a guy named Gene Bortoncini like a couple days ago. Gordy Johnson, Twin Cities bassist, hooked me up with Gene. And it was just a mind-blowing lesson. And, I'm just trying to increase my understanding of the music and my technique. And people have probably noticed, because I'm not gigging, I'm not playing in I'd been playing an arch-top guitar for the last 10 years pretty solidly, and focused more on just straight-ahead jazz. I had been really deep into the Django bag when we first met, and had done that since I was about 15, and kind of shifted gears and did the straight ahead thing. And then recently, because I'm alone, I'm playing solo, I've been really digging into some of the solo Joe Pass recordings, especially like the Virtuoso records, and then the work he did with Ella Fitzgerald, the duets that he did with her. And Charmin Michelle and I collaborate regularly, and we did a program. We called it just Ella and Joe, and did sort of an homage to those recordings, she and I. So being home, I have this beautiful little, it's cheap. It's just a $600 nylon string guitar. And I have no reason to plug in at this point. And I was like, well, I'm just going to put all my efforts into this little nylon string guitar. And when I started doing straight ahead stuff, I started using my fingers more for comping, instead of doing a more of a rhythmic style like Django Reinhardt or Freddie Green, but doing more comping with the arch top as one would. There was always this, I have a pick. I always have a pick on me, and I keep it in my mouth, and I take it out when I need it, and I still use the pick a lot. But I've been trying to increase and this is why I'm just blown away by your playing. I'm completely knocked out by it. But trying to improve my right hand with using fingers instead of using a pick for lines when I'm playing solo. Anyways, so that's been, getting back to your original question, my practice sessions have been very intentional in terms of working on my technique with my fingers, and working on both rest strokes and free strokes, and then use of the thumb, and just trying to get used to like getting your nails just the way you want them to be, and just forever sort of futzing and putzing with that because I've never quite figured it out, trying to keep them just perfectly smooth, and vitamin D supplements and like all of these things, because this is new to me. It's like, I could buy a purple Tortex pick for 25 cents and put it in my mouth, and that's great. Mm-hmm. It's worked for me for the past 15 years, but just working that out where I'm trying to put a rest stroke on the melody note of a chord melody type thing. So, that's what I've been up to.
I've really appreciated your very consistent, solo live streams that you've been doing, and I think intentional is a great word, because I just feel like the kind of the nuance of your playing is really on display, and like how focused and intentional everything that you play is. It's like there's nothing extraneous there. It's very clear where the ideas are going, and while you're improvising. So it's been really great to see those.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I take that as a compliment, because that's kind of what I hope to go for, and it's like a good short story. It should be like good literary prose should be clear. They should be crystal clear, and it should, create some kind of an emotional story. So that's my attempt at doing that. So so that's kind of the scoop, and having that discipline of saying, I'm going to put out a weekly video, out into the world, and I've done the Patreon thing now, which is nice because we can make a little money as musicians with Patreon. People can throw some money towards you, and that's nice. And then I had the up here in Grand Rapids, we have what we call the First Friday Downtown Art Walk, and every first Friday of the month, my wife runs a visual arts center in Grand Rapids, a gallery, and there's the Rife Center, Performing Arts Center, and kind of a number of newer music venues. We've got a couple breweries in town and a wine bar, and they're all having music. So the town would kind of opens its doors, the downtown, and businesses would have musicians come and play, and then sort of at the end of it would begin around 4 o'clock, and then by 7 o'clock we would play at our local VFW. We kind of turned it into a jazz club for First Fridays, and people would come down to the local watering hole, and I received numerous both Arrowhead Regional Arts Council grants and Minnesota State Arts Board grants, and that's how we funded this First Friday event. And we did it for 10 years, I think, maybe more. And my dad plays upright bass, and obviously I'm the guitarist. And then we would bring up a guest soloist and a guest drummer to be part of the rhythm section. So I'd have either Jay Epstein or Nathan Norman come up and be the rhythm section, and then we'd have the guest artists. So we'd either have Charmin Michelle or Doug Haining or Dave Carr, or we had Laura Caviani and Chris Lomheim, and just a lot of the Twin Cities names. And that was always on the first Friday of the month. Well, that went away with COVID, and actually just sort of like it was almost like a sign of some kind from the cosmos. But the VFW that we played at burnt to the ground like the week the pandemic hit. There was a building fire and it burnt, and it was like, oh my God. And then the pandemic, like when everything shut down, I mean, it was literally in the same week. And so that just went away. And that was like, I played every Wednesday night during the week at the VFW, and then the first Friday. So I'd have 5 gigs a month there. And I mean, God, the Fridays were packed. I mean, it was like standing room only. Like everyone in the town would show up to be there for this. Because, I mean, people knew that it was very special to have someone like Chris Lomheim or Dave Carr or Charmin Michelle on stage in northern Minnesota. And it left such a void when that happened that it was like, well, I mean, it was a void for both me and it was a void for other people who loved going to that event. It was really a unifying event for our community that I wanted to continue that first Friday art walk kind of a thing, but do it virtually. And my wife's art gallery in town that she runs, they do a virtual first Friday gallery opening where they, like videotape the gallery and stuff. And they're still open for business, but it's a limited amount of people that can be in the gallery at any one time, and it's masked and everything else. So anyways, the first Friday event still happens virtually here in Grand Rapids, so that's my contribution to it.
Gotcha. And you, my understanding is that you grew up in Grand Rapids, is that right?
I did. I went to high school in Grand Rapids, and I actually grew up about 15 miles north of town, out in the country. Yeah, actually, we're building a house up there right now, so I'll be back in the old neighborhood here. But, I have these dual existences, one as a guitarist and jazz musician, and the other as a outdoorsman. And it's, I've tried to create a marriage of the two up here in the north as best I can.
So you're actually building a house at the moment?
Yeah, we are. And there's been some hurdles thrown at us here recently just due to COVID. There's just some unforeseen circumstances. So spent the day not practicing today, doing more manual labor. I'm not building the house myself, but contributing some of my labor to the project. So
Gotcha.
My hands are not like great guitar shape right now.
Gotcha. Well, that's fascinating. And it sounds like you very much grew up in a household of jazz music and of musicians.
I did. Yeah, very much so. So kind of both sides of my family, in fact. My dad's family, his father was an upright bassist and played in swing bands in the 1930s and 40s. Very much a part of that swing era. I've got some really cool photos of him, with like the pants up to here and suspenders and the wide tie. And, they have a van that the band traveled around in. So he, and I think, it's not like he had a lot of notoriety, but his claim to fame was the union called him and he did get to play bass for Joe Venuti. And it wasn't a fake prank Joe Venuti phone call. It was an actual Joe Venuti gig. So, anyways, he played upright bass, and then my grandmother played cello, and we're both musicians. And he, in fact, auditioned for the Minnesota Orchestra in the 1950s or early 60s and got the audition. And it was a question of if he would move family from northern Minnesota down to Minneapolis, and ultimately decided against it. He was an immigrant kid, and he had immigrant parents who were up here on the Iron Range, and he kind of wound up back up in northern Minnesota to sort of care for them. But as far as his pedigree, he was just a really fine musician, obviously would be if you get a call back from the Minnesota Orchestra, and played both classical and swing music. And then my mom's mother was a pianist. Interesting story. She wound up contracting, this is appropriate for this time, she wound up getting polio during the polio epidemic in the United States and could no longer play. After 25 years, she became quadriplegic. So that's an interesting parallels in time. And then my dad and all of his siblings played music. They played rock back in the 70s and stuff, and then, kind of gravitated more towards folk music. And I grew up with family jam sessions, and kind of the way I began playing guitar was just sitting around the circle with my uncles, playing tunes and stuff. And so I was immersed in that. My dad played jazz records for me, so kind of his taste was, he'd have Count Basie records and Errol Garner and Billie Holiday and who else? He loved Benny Goodman and Stefan Grappelli. My first Stefan Grappelli that I heard was a record that was done with Nils Henning Orsted Pedersen and Joe Pass and Stefan Grappelli. So that was like one of those records I heard as a kid that kind of really inspired me. But then my mom loves jazz as well, but she would play Coltrane for me and Miles Davis and Chick Corea and Wayne Shorter and sort of that era. Keith Jarrett, she loved Keith Jarrett. So this was kind of the music that was in the household that I was exposed to. So, they kind of primed me for my love of jazz. So,
Did you have a direct role model on the guitar at that point?
when I was a kid, this is a weird thing to say. I sometimes feel like I'm not really that good of a musician. I wound up picking the guitar because I could play it the best. I figured it out. The geometry of the guitar made a lot of sense to me. But I had always really wanted to play jazz piano because I loved Duke Ellington and Bill Evans, and I just was never good enough to really do it. I could never really get the jazz piano thing down. But for whatever reason, the guitar, when I picked it up, all the pieces of it just clicked for me. The technique and the sort of the symmetry and geometry of the neck of a guitar and the strings, and I picked it up really quickly. I started playing when I was 13, and I just, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm fairly decent at this. I guess I'll focus on this instrument. And it wasn't like I was like goo goo gaga about guitar. It's just that I could do it fairly proficiently. But then when I really became super inspired, about the guitar was, I was 15 and I heard Django. I heard Django Reinhardt, and the virtuosity of his playing was like, oh my God, this is just incredible. And, there's a lot of, hot club music around now. I mean, when I started learning it was like 1999, so that's a long time ago now, over 20 years. And I, kind of threw myself into that. And, but I still go back to those Django records, and man, the stuff that exists is good. There's some really good hot club playing, and there's some like really virtuosic players, and there are the very best of the best are remarkably musical. But I just listen to Django, and I'm just floored by how incredibly musical he was. And there's a lot of focus sort of on his Roma, gypsy background, but I'm really struck mostly by what a deep improviser he was, and how he created this art in kind of a musical vacuum in Europe, because it was like not, he's not hanging out with Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. I mean, he did do some playing with Coleman Hawkins, but he wasn't immersed in jazz the way you would be in 1937 in Kansas City or Chicago or New York, and the fact that he created this music in Europe, detached from the American jazz scene. I mean, he was just really a remarkable musician and a total genius, and a really true improviser. And I'm more struck by the fact that he was such a deep jazz musician and such a deep improviser versus his sort of connection to the ethnic roots. And he never really emphasized those ethnic roots. He recorded Dark Eyes, but other than that, he wasn't playing like Musette waltzes on the guitar. This was a guy who was, in the 1940s, after he had heard Dizzy Gillespie play a festival in France, he's like trying to play bebop in France, and he moved from acoustic guitar to electric guitar, and he died relatively young. I think he died in 1953. He was born in 1910. His playing evolved so much, and of course, one always wonders what more would have come. And he was pretty radical and experimental for a guitarist during that time period. I mean, if you listen to what Eddie Lang, Carl Kress, Dick McDonald were doing with chord melody guitar, it's a completely different thing than what Django was doing. I think Charlie Christian and he were the only two that were really sort of rivaled in terms of their melodic capabilities and sense. He was just a superstar, and I don't listen to that music a lot because I listened to it so much when I was younger. But when I do, I just go, holy smokes, man, this is really something. This is someone who changes the face of modern music on our particular instrument. So, as far as that initial deep inspiration, it really was Django when I was about 15 years old.
I have another friend who's really deep into Django's music and has played it for a long time. And I just talking to him, I kind of didn't realize that, how much of a vacuum Django created this music in. And that even, I was surprised to know that there's some debate over how much, Roma gypsy influence actually is in his music.
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly is the influence in regards to, this is something that you and I can talk about, like, because you do the flamenco, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at Django's technique, the way he played and the way when you're first sort of initially learning the technique and vocabulary of, hot club music. If you look at the right hand, it's like really bent. It's like at a 45-degree angle. And, I think of some of the, North African music that came to Spain in that bent wrist, and how oud players would use their wrist, but also in flamenco too, that arching or whatever, and also the you're thinking about the thumb, and Django's playing is he's doing all these downstrokes, like these double downstrokes and stuff with the pick. And it's not an alternate picking like, a bebop type picking like Joe Pass. And then, of course, there's these kind of, rhythmic flourishes that he throws into the music. And then the other influence that I hear is that harmonic minor scale when you're, it's that sound of the flatted sixth and the major seventh. Getting that, or the sort of the superimposed flat nine over the dominant chord that, you can link the diminished scale or diminished arpeggio over a dominant. If you got a G7, thinking about it in terms of like an A flat diminished superimposed over that. So I think of those sounds as sort of associated with that Roma. Technique and musicality. But then again, I don't know if any of us can really escape our roots and our influences in life. We all bring something to the table with that, the same way that, Lester Young was a fabulous blues player and he was born in New Orleans. So, that's just going to be part of the deal. Mm-hmm. So, Django is a really fascinating figure. And like I say, I'm not as deep into it. I wound up kind of departing from it because I just needed a departure from it. I needed to get away from it for a while. And now I've gravitated back towards it. But I'm not interested in playing it like the way, Django would have done that. I'm more drawn to, listening to, like, there's a wonderful record called For Django that Joe Pass and what's his name, Pisano, I think is the last name. They did this record that was a bunch of Django Reinhardt tunes, but it was done in a more sort of a straight ahead approach, and I heard that record and I went, oh man, I want to do this. And then you just go down a rabbit hole of finding, different guitar players that are influential to you, and so I started listening to a lot of Barney Kessel, started listening to a lot of Joe Pass, got really, I'm sure you know about this cat, but got really deep into Lenny Breau and just became rather obsessed with Lenny Breau's playing. And that's kind of when I became more fascinated with nylon strings, was, listening to Lenny Breau. Same deal with Joe, when he was playing acoustic guitar, it was nylon strings. But the thing about Lenny was, his like technique was just, it's just unbelievable. Just remarkable technique. And it's more like, it kind of transcends jazz to me. His playing is more like tone poetry or coloration of music, and textural, and it's, you hear flamenco influence in Lenny's playing, and you hear country music in Lenny's playing, and you hear straight ahead jazz music in Lenny's playing, and it's all I think sometimes when people like sort of fuse music together, it's like a very disjointed like marriage of something that's like sort of tried to be welded together, where with Lenny it's just completely integrated into his being and his sense of playing, so it always sounds musical. It doesn't sound like different components sort of stitched together. So these days it's fun to revisit some of my favorite Django compositions and come at it from a different approach, come towards it with fingerstyle, or creating more of a bebop type line when you're soloing over it, thinking about it. Because Django's playing is very, it's a very vertical type of playing. It's, really dominated by arpeggios and large leaps across the neck of the guitar. And it's interesting to play those tunes in a more linear approach, and thinking about altered dominant scales over things, and what you can do with more of a linear bebop type line. So it's just different approaches, and I think that's what we all do, right? We all find things that we're inspired by and that we gravitate towards, and they all just come together to create our own personal vocabulary, and then we find other people who have a similar vocabulary, and we contribute to one another's conversation, and that's music, or at least how I think it should be.
A great majority of the music that you play is all about that ensemble interaction and improvising, like you said, and kind of having a conversation. Are you finding outlets for that right now, either in terms of kind of modeling solo guitar after that type of conversation, or performing with your family or outdoors or things like that?
Yeah, that's a good conversation. I would say I'm a very risk averse person. I'm nervous by nature, and the honest truth is not really. I just don't have what I feel is a safe outlet to do that. And because I'm somewhat detached from not somewhat, I am detached from the Twin Cities community, which has been my primary collaborating circle, has been Twin Cities musicians. I'm not going to Minneapolis to play, and they're not coming up here to play. So it's really been, that's why the solo videos and solo guitar has kind of taken over. But what I will say is Charmin, Michelle, and I are talking about doing some kind of a remote recording project, track recording things, and doing some duets together. And, we've been threatening to do this for years. I met her when I was like 16, and I'm 35. So it's like about time, I would say. And we're kind of best buds, and we just love each other, and have been doing this together for so long. And just outside of the music itself, we're just really close friends. And so, we're trying to come up with a creative way to do track recording, where we record some kind of a duo project together. So that's kind of in the works.
Just in terms of, talking about the risk in your community, what's your sense of how COVID is affecting or not, Grand Rapids?
That's a good question. What I can say is I picked up the newspaper today, and we've had fairly large increase in cases over the past month of August. What it's attributed to, I don't know. But there was an outbreak of COVID in one of the senior living, assisted living facilities up here in Itasca County in Deer River, which is just the next town over, maybe 15, 20 miles. And this senior living facility is associated with the Essentia Health Clinic over there. So there's been an increase there. It's a strange thing because one of the things that we really have going to our benefit is we have the capability of just spreading out. We're a rural county. I mean, the town of Grand Rapids is 10,000 people, and I would say, the greater Grand Rapids area, because we have the people that live in the country who live on the lakes and stuff, is maybe 20,000. And then beyond that, Itasca County and northern Itasca County is very, very rural, and so I think have the capability of just spreading out, and just by the very nature of being outside and being away from people, it's not going to spread in the same capacity that it does in an urban center. That said, we're not immune to it, and we do have it here. It does exist, and to our detriment, there is definitely this. I'm getting political here, but there is definitely this sort of underlying, it's something that's pervasive across the country, but right-wing rural contingency that I can't stand, that I despise. I'm pretty far to the left, and there's just this insane denial of the reality of what we're going through. And I had friends from the metro say, I want to come up and go fishing. And I'm like, okay, well, you just got to know, like, nobody's wearing their mask. Until it was mandated, it was just like, no one up here wore a mask. It just didn't happen, and now that it's mandated, that's changed. But there's still businesses here that say you don't have to wear a mask when you come in. I went in, I hadn't gone into a business for months, and I went into a shop that I needed to go to, and, the owner of the shop and three of his clients were in there, no one wearing a mask, and it's really disconcerting. And knowing that exists, my answer to that is just stay away, and I just stay away. That's kind of my personality to begin with. I kind of like to melt into the shadows at different times in my life, and I'm kind of melting into the shadows as much, or maybe more like I'm melting into the forest. And so, that woods time and outdoors time has really been a solace to me during COVID. My dad and I harvest wild rice, so we were out harvesting this week. Wild rice. I'm an avid gardener. I've had the most productive garden of my life because I can go out there and just work in it. And I'm a hunter, so I'll be going out in the fall and hopefully getting a deer and getting some ducks and some grouse to put in our freezer. And so I've been calling on that part of my life a lot during COVID times, and I just really try and stay away. I don't want to get sick. I've been sick before in my life, and I've been really sick, and I don't want to do that. I might not be able to get away with not getting sick. I might get sick anyways, but I'm going to do everything in my power. You can't control every circumstance, but the things you can control, that I can control, I'm going to. And I think the term an abundance of caution is not being used as readily as it should. It's this is just such a serious deal, and I really take it seriously. And it scares me, man. I don't know what lies beyond this realm of existence, and I'm not too keen to find out right now. I want to stick around on planet Earth as long as I can. I got a lot more music I want to play. I got a lot more gardens I want to plant, and kind of the way I feel is I'm willing to hit the pause button now so that I get to have something more later in life.
I definitely think there's this huge disconnect, which I'm kind of, somebody who grew up and lived in Minneapolis for most of his life. There's this huge gap or gulf between people who have this very urban, Twin Cities existence and people in other, more rural parts of Minnesota, just in terms of the pandemic and the attitudes towards it. And, I wonder if some of that is due to places where the virus has spread versus where, places that haven't been hit by it yet. but there, I mean, I was just pretty ignorant of a lot of the pushback of even things like wearing masks until very recently.
Yeah, it's just a really different deal where we live, and it's a strange thing because there's a certain level of. I lived in St. Paul for about 9 months, and I spent some time in San Francisco as a young person, and I made an intentional choice to come back to where I was born and raised, and I could have decided to stay in the Twin Cities, or I could have decided to move to California where the hot club of San Francisco was. But I made an intentional choice to come back here and try and build a little artistic community, and we've had some real success with it up here. My wife and I, with art in rural area in a rural part of the state, and we're connected to other rural parts of the state with other artists. We had the Rural Arts and Culture Summit here in Grand Rapids this past year at the Rife Center, and we've attended those summits before across the state. So there's a real distinct effort at providing art to rural communities. But in regards to the pandemic and the sort of political atmosphere of it, it's a tricky thing because when you live in a city, there's a certain amount of anonymity that you can have. You can kind of blend into the larger population. Of course, you have your circles of people that you know and care for. But in a small rural community, so many people know so many people, in that town. And it's really sad. I actually wound up, I'd been in such anger and frustration mode for so long, I hadn't cried in like 3 months. And I put on a record in the car and I was listening to it, and it reminded me of a friend that I have who is a musician up here, who I had many, many gigs with, and beautiful jam sessions, and we were very close friends, and he's a great musician, and he's on the other political side of the fence, and to a rather extreme extent that I finally said, I can't do this anymore. I can't be involved with this. It's my moral conviction says that I can't say that this is okay. I can't, and I haven't spoken to him in months, and until something changes in that attitude, I'm not comfortable being involved in that kind of a relationship. And I listened to a song that we had played together before, and I just broke down crying in the car or in my pickup truck, because I thought, God, this event is not something that should be politicized. This is something that should bring together our shared humanity, and the fact that it has been is really a tragic thing, and we feel that in a small town, and we're feeling it across the nation, and we feel that divide, that gap between us. And one of the things I've thought about so much is I don't want my heart to become hardened. I want to maintain some level of compassion and love and sweetness, because I've felt so angry and almost to the point of rage in regards to sort of the right-wing response to the pandemic. But one thing I do know is I hear from so many people, and this is not false humility. I am really, truly humbled by how many people have said, what your music does emotionally for me means so much. Please keep playing. Please keep putting videos out there. Please keep doing what you do artistically, because it means so much to me when I listen to that piece of music. And I think as artists, you and I and all the other people in our shared community that we have of Minnesota jazz musicians and Minnesota musicians, just in general, no matter how hard it may be, I think we need art as much now as we ever have, and it's so vitally important to provide that, to do that in whatever capacity we can, in whatever capacity we're comfortable in doing that. And at first it was like, God, I don't even feel like playing, when it first happened, because everything was so up in the air. And but art means so much. Music is such a powerfully healing force in the world, that's why, when I was in the beginning of our conversation, that's why that sense of being intentional about it is so important. My dad suffered a stroke last winter, and he's doing great. He's out harvesting wild rice, so obviously he's doing just fine. But his the point I'm trying to make is his physical therapist and his neurologist said, the brain creates new pathways. When one part of the brain is damaged, the brain does sort of rewire itself. But it's up to you to be disciplined enough to keep at these exercises that we give you, so you can either gain back what was lost or find new ways of doing old tricks. And I think that's what's at hand for us as musicians, is to, even though our lives especially as performing artists has been so disrupted, it's a matter of maintaining that discipline of keeping our art fresh, because it's not just like riding a bicycle. We need to maintain ourselves. We need to maintain ourselves physically, our hands. We need to maintain our musical knowledge that we've gained, so we, don't lose, our life's passion and work that we've invested so much of our time into. And, the art isn't just for us, it's for everybody, and no matter what genre you play, no matter your skill level, any of it, all of that aside, your voice is needed. I think each individual artistic voice is needed right now. So I just, I'm that's how I feel about it. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I know other artists are doing that as well. I know lots of artists feel this way. I hear this sentiment amongst so many musicians, so many visual artists, and it's just a challenging time. But look at my grandparents lived through the Depression and the World War II era, and how important music was during that time period, to keep people's spirits afloat. So that's kind of my feelings on it.
That's such a beautiful way to frame it, because you're right. Music has gotten it's gotten people through world wars and disease and other, it's gotten people through the Holocaust. I mean, it's really a vital part of our humanity. It's not just a frivolous activity that's nice to have in times of prosperity, but it really, I think, like you said, it really has the potential to heal. You have a wonderful project that you got some attention and notoriety for, called the Improvised Life, which
Yes.
deals with creativity and the discussion around mental health and mental illness.
When I was 22, I suffered a very severe psychotic break. I was living in the Twin Cities at the time, and I was, when I say psychotic break, I mean a complete, like being catapulted into another dimension of existence. I was diagnosed to begin with schizoaffective disorder, and then as time went on, I was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. It was an incredibly painful time of my life. My capacity to gig, to play music, as I had been, was really diminished. My ability to go on, I could hardly care for myself. This is the brain is the epicenter of all human activity. It's the command center of all of life, and the connections were lost. Let's just say. So I had a psychotic break, but during that time period, and there were two artists that just kind of saved me, and the one that was connected to the Improvised Life was Thelonious Monk. And I listened to Bill Evans and Thelonious Monk like all day, every day during that time period. And it just kind of saved me. It soothed my soul, and it just saved me. And I watched, Clint Eastwood did that documentary, Straight No Chaser, about Monk. This is a documentary done in the 1980s. There was some filmmakers that followed Monk around in the 1960s, and he acquired this footage and put together this documentary about Thelonious. And so I watched that documentary, and Thelonious had serious mental health struggles in his life. And so as time went on, I just sort of immediately related, because it was like, you have this radical experience, this disconnect from reality, these thoughts that are just not true. They're delusional thoughts and paranoid thoughts. And I had hallucinations. My primary struggle was with thought process and paranoia. And it's such an extreme experience that you can't imagine that any other human would have ever experienced this. But in fact, 1% of the human population has. 1% of the human population has schizophrenia. It is an illness that exists in pretty proportional existence across the globe that people have, and there are other illnesses like bipolar that cause psychosis, and Thelonious was hospitalized numerous times for mental health problems, and I just felt like, God, I'm not alone. At least this guy walked through this hell as well, and so I just felt this sort of kinship and connection to his music. So I wound up reading Robin Kelly's book, the biography of Thelonious Monk. I think it was called Life and Times of an American Original, if I got it right, but I might have got it wrong. But I just, this book it's a tome, and it's like they could tell you like what kind of pastrami sandwich he had in Manhattan in 1968. It's like everything you ever wanted to know about Monk is in there. And I read that, and the thing that I was really struck by was, yes, Thelonious Monk had a major mental illness. They think that he had bipolar now, but I was struck by the fact that just so absolutely did not define him. It didn't define who he was, and that in spite of that mental illness, he was able to create some of the most miraculous music, modern music of the 20th century, and change the face of modern American music. And it was just really inspirational. But on top of that, Monk was a really loyal and dedicated husband to his wife, Nellie. He had 2 children. He was staying home and doing daddy daycare during the day and playing gigs at night. And this was someone that really loved his family as well. And that was like inspirational to me to see a jazz musician who is so dedicated to his family life and how much he loved his kids and his wife, and that in spite of very deep challenges with mental health, he still managed to create this beauty in the world, and against the backdrop of police brutality. He was beaten by police officers in the 1960s. He and Bud Powell were arrested. He was thrown in jail. His cabaret card was taken away. He was on tour with Charlie Rouse, I think, and Pannonica de Koningswater, the jazz baroness, who sort of befriended and cared for Monk, was on tour with him. I think this is in Maryland, and he goes into a restaurant to get a glass of water, and he is probably in some level of mental health struggle, and this is the 1960s, and he's a black man, and the police come and beat him up. And I remember, in the story, Pannonica saying, "Please don't beat his hands with a billy club," So, it all ties into what we're dealing with today with police brutality and racism in America. And in spite of all this, Thelonious did what he did. He created what he created for the world, for us. And it was just deeply inspiring. And so when I created the Improvised Life, it was the first grant I wrote, I did not receive. I wrote it for the Minnesota State Arts Board, and it focused way more on Thelonious and Thelonious's music. And I was like within a hair of getting the grant funding for it. And I was really disappointed when I didn't get it, because I thought it was a great application, and we worked really hard on it. And they were like, "Man, this, you listen to the State Arts Board's notes, you can hear them, because they record the panel." And it was like, man, we were so close to getting this grant. And my wife Katie, who writes grants for me, she said, I think you need to incorporate more of your story. You need to tell more of your story of mental health, and how you've overcome this and how you've learned to manage it and cope and adapt to it. And I said, okay, all right. So I started weaving my story into a narrative and drawing parallels to his mental health and mine, and finding some commonality in that, and then but then I also talked about my creative process of how I write music and how I compose. And I have no formal training whatsoever. I've just found sort of a way that I think about the music, and I funnel that into my compositions. And so I combined Thelonious Monk's story, my personal story, his music, and my compositions, and I interwove that narrative and those compositions all together to create, this program, the Improvised Life. And when we put that grant application in, we did get the Minnesota State Arts Board grant, and was able to tour it across the state of Minnesota, and had a pretty all-star band. I had Chris Bates on upright bass, and Dave Carr on saxophone, and Nathan Norman on drums. And it actually sort of initially began there was a mental health center here in Grand Rapids called Keesler House, and it was both sort of a gathering place and a housing center for people with mental illness. And they were in this little rundown building on the edge of town, and everyone looked at it like, God, this is sort of a scary place to go or to be. And the people who were running it said, we need something better. So they wanted to create a building, and we did a benefit for the Keesler Wellness Center. The first time I performed these Monk tunes and kind of got the initial inspiration was a benefit to raise money for Keesler Wellness Center, and I think we raised $33,000 to contribute to the Keesler Wellness Center, which is here in Grand Rapids. It's been built, and it's a beautiful facility, and it has counseling available. It has a rec room. It has people can go there to see their meds provider, and access to mental health care has greatly increased in Grand Rapids, and it's increased, I think, across the state. And from when I was initially diagnosed when I was 22, I'm 35 now, 13 years, things have just gotten much better. And so stigma, discrimination is something that I've really struggled with. I have my own issues surrounding police brutality and mental health. I had sort of my own experience with law enforcement, but that's a whole nother conversation we can have. But I wanted to take all these elements and put it together and bring it around the state. One of the things I really wanted to do is I wanted to bring jazz, high quality art, to rural parts of the state where people are underserved and don't have as much access to this kind of music. They might have access to music, but not necessarily Thelonious Monk or jazz or improvised music. So that was another thing I wanted to do. So it was twofold, where I would go to a mental health center that's providing services, and I would do that during the day. So, like, for instance, Northland Counseling in International Falls and I partnered, and I went and I played a concert for people who are receiving mental health services who are living with major mental illness, because I wanted to be sure that these people had access to art, because I knew how healing art was for me in my mental health. And so we would do that during the day, and then we would do a public performance at night, where we'd go to a performing arts center like the Bacchus Performing Arts Center up in International Falls, and I would do the Improvised Life program. And we do an hour-long program for people receiving services, and then we do a full, two-set performance for people in a performing arts center. And the idea was to make sure people who are receiving services, who have chronic mental illness, have access to the art, access to my story, as well as then educating the general public and the community that we were in about mental health and mental illness. And the reception we got was just unbelievable. People would say, God, my son has struggled. How and where do I get help, and what do we do? And we like really quickly realized that like we needed to have like access to materials and help, because the outpouring was like, oh my God, someone's finally talking about this. How do I get my person that I love help for this? I can't, and in Alexandria or International Falls or Cook, Minnesota, and it was a really remarkable experience, and it was a really, really powerful experience, and I'm super grateful to do it. And it was, my way of, we all have a story to tell. We all have a fight that we can fight. We can't fight everyone's fight, but we all have a fight that we can fight, that we can speak to personally. And this was a fight that I could speak to, and that I could go to bat for. And it was my way of approaching social justice in a way that I felt like I had some street cred with, you know what I mean? For me, it was a social justice project, and it's something I'm really proud of. It was, I had some other calamity that happened in the midst of that program, and I really improvised my life through it, and got through that tour and that project, and it was just a great thing to do.
I feel like a lot of people could learn from how you took your personal craft and your journey with mental health and turned that into something that clearly had a very tangible, immediate benefit on your your community and communities around the state and Twin Cities. And I just think that's amazing.
I think there's always a time to sort of strike when the iron is hot, and I think we're seeing that now. This is a time of great social change and upheaval, and the story has not been finished. It's not been fully written. It's still unfolding. And the time period in which I was working on that project, it was like, okay, people are ready to hear this. People are ready to talk about mental health. And I don't think I could have pulled it off or done it as effectively when I was, 22, 23, 24. It had to be the right time for it. And people were willing to listen and willing to talk. And it was, as they say, the right thing at the right time.
So where can people go to find out more about the Improvised Life, and even to donate or contribute somehow?
Yeah, they can just go to my website. It's just sammiltichmusic.com. And I still have a page up for the Improvised Life. And even after the grant cycle was done, individual groups still hired the band to do the Improvised Life. They'd say, oh, we're doing an event in Duluth at Denfeld High School. We did the Improvised Life there. So it had a life even after the grant cycle was over. People still wanted to bring that to different performing arts centers and to different events. And of course, COVID hit, and then everything changed. I imagine that program probably would have continued, down the road had, it been given the opportunity to keep moving. But, something new happened. And so we're improvising our way through this now. So
I hope and will not be surprised probably that it does continue. And I hope selfishly that we get a chance to jam in person sometime in the near future.
I'm really looking forward to actually being in the same room with other people that I care about and making music with humans again. So I absolutely would love that.
Well, Sam, is there anything else that you're working on at the moment that we didn't cover, or any projects or records that you want to highlight?
I did put out a record last year called Peasants with Torches, and that's my latest release. And if people want to buy it, go to my website. And there is a tune titled Now's the Time to Panic. Has a little bit of a vibe for what we're going through these days. So yeah, Peasants with Torches. That's the latest thing. And it's got a lot of the original compositions on it. So if people are interested, it's available on the website. So other than
that's awesome.
Just cooking supper for the kids and getting outside as much as I can. So,
well, Sam, this was super, super awesome, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to sit down and chat.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be able to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise.